This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to part 2 of our two-parter on Innistrad 3 Electric Jubilee. This is basically, now that we got the knee-jerk reaction, how we felt about it when it was announced. This episode is going to be how we're dealing with it here in the here and now, the realities of the set release and allocation of funds thereof. So, without further ado, let's get more into the minutia about that stuff than we did last episode.
Yep. I like the way we worked it last time, just going like big vendor on down, because I think it makes the most sense. He's palatable for people, and if I'm a big vendor, this is actually really bad for me, because I allocate my funds based on a cycle and a schedule of sets to come into standard and supplementals that are announced. Now, WotC has turned that on its ear. I have another standard set I have to care about, and it's out of cycle. So the funds that I've allocated for this now either have to be split, or I've got to find more funds and move them from somewhere else into this pile. So if I have the ability to, I'm going to spend equally across both in the blind. If I don't, for whatever reason, I would actually... So this is well before spoilers, right? Because you have to get your orders in months before any of this shit happens.
Yes.
And I think after... but before I had to put my order into distro, I would find out that these are both standard legal, and I would probably put my money on Midnight Hunt over the secondary set, because I don't think WotC would make the secondary set better for standard than the primary. And so I'm not saying I would split it like 66-33. I think it'd probably be closer to like 55-45, or maybe 60-40, which is a little more out of balance. But I think I would slant heavier to the first one. And now that I'm seeing what spoilers look like for this, I can then take my second wave money, or my second wave allocation money, and either decide to put more into this one or shuffle off a little bit into werewolves in case I get the feeling that into vampires, in case I think, hey, this one's going to be juiced too, and we need to put a little more over here. And then the EDH decks, it's like we talked about in the first episode, 4 decks totals, 2 in each set, 30 new cards each. That's easy. I would just take my standard allocation for an EDH set and just break it between the two. I'd just split 50-50. And when I find out that the commanders for the werewolf set have nothing to do with werewolves, it's zombies and humans, I'd probably just like wipe my brow off and thank myself that I only split 50-50, because I don't know how well these are going to fucking sell, and if I'm just going to end up busting them for singles.
I think, the 55-45 to me makes more sense as a large vendor than anything else. I think at the LGS level, it gets a little bit different. Because, at that point, at the LGS level, you have to account for other releases around this time of year. And at that point, it's like, all right, well, holidays are going to be, I need to stock board games. I need to stock D&D stuff. I need to stock a minimum of Magic stuff. But the stuff I do want to stock is the stuff I can sell to anyone. So I'd go heavier on the commander sets than I would on the sealed for like Crimson Vow or, the werewolf set. Either way, I think I'd focus more on that if I'm in the LGS, because worst case scenario, I sell it to some grandma or aunt or uncle or mom or dad that walks in, and if it ends up still in my inventory afterwards, I just bust it if I have to. Whereas if I'm sitting on the sealed product in these boxes, well, once Crimson Vow comes out, I may not be able to do anything with these draft boosters anymore from the werewolf set, so I should probably buy a little bit less of that because I've got a shorter timeline on that. And I think that, touching on what happens into the holidays and having to allocate for these other releases, that bumps into Crimson Vow, which releases in November, because now all of a sudden, all right, well, I need to have, Catan or Pandemic or whatever, just to make sure I have extra copies of that for the holidays and I'm stocked. Well, I can probably afford to buy a little bit less sealed product of Crimson Vow until after the holidays, just because I need to allocate for these other things. I need my pops. I need my anime statues, my comic books, whatever. It is. So I think, this model that they're doing, this seems to hurt the LGS more than anything, because your Magic selection tends to be, you get a little bit less sealed during the holidays anyways. Mm-hmm. And now you've got 2 releases stacked on top of each other where you're not necessarily like worried about, well, this comes out in December, so it doesn't really matter that I'm not going to be able to sell it during the holidays. No, this comes out in November, so you could still sell it, and that's the extra consideration. So for me, I go EDH, Commander decks all day long.
I want to stick on the LGS for a minute, because I think it's really important to point out that when you're working at a large vendor and you're looking at a vendor that vends in multiple verticals across multiple games, and you think like, okay, that's similar to an LGS, it's actually kind of important to remember that each of these verticals is its own department at an LGS, and they're essentially responsible for their own purchasing and reselling. Each one of these verticals is allocated funds essentially based on what they've done previously and historically, and it's not like the money in the vendor coffers is like strictly bound to department, but they know what they're going to spend actually. When it comes to an LGS, it's a lot different, and you can sure look at expenses and profits across different verticals, but when it comes to the holiday time, the point that you made of knowing exactly what you're going to sell across your various verticals is really important, because you're going to want to do exactly what you said, which is generalize. You're not going to go as hard on like Warhammer stuff and Magic, these niche things, as you would on some things that are a little more general and a little more palatable, that can sit on the shelves a little longer because they'll still churn throughout the year because they're general, Yeah. And I think that's kind of important to remember at the LGS level, and how that truly is different than at the vendor level. It's something else you have to care about. And I think you're right. I think it absolutely does truck the LGS, and I would focus... I think the EDH stuff, if AFR EDH stuff sold well.
Fair, yeah.
And I think that's kind of how I would have to track it, is if the set-specific EDH stuff has sold well, because that's kind of like the new dimension or the new flavor to EDH rather than the yearly release is considered, or Commander, whatever you want to call it. Because apparently some people don't know the format by EDH, I found out on Friday. That you have to put your money where it's going to work the best for you. And if the set-based commander decks just have been on a downtrend, then maybe you don't spend as much there. But at the same time, I don't know where I would put my money for Magic when I'm solicited for Crimson Vow if it's not the EDH product.
Exactly, and that's kind of, you may be sitting on it, but it's a whole lot easier to bust EDH product than it is to bust cases of sealed boosters.
It's also easier to sell EDH product at a lesser price point than it is boxes of Crimson Vow over the holidays too.
Yeah. Being able to say, look, they're ready to play with this box, as opposed to this box, which is 3 times as much in some cases, is maybe they'll get a deck out of it, maybe they won't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing too, is that a lot of LGSs, when you talk about needing to know what you're selling, a lot of LGSs are a lot more hand to mouth than some of the bigger guys like Art Kingdom or Star City Games. And there's some of them that literally make or break their Q4 and their Q1 based on their holiday sales. And being able to have that revenue come in and fund your Q1 and maybe even into your Q2 when you hit that post-Christmas lull is super important. So being able to say, what are the things I'm going to sell to my holiday shoppers? What's the bare minimum I can get by with for my entrenched players that are still going to come around and may still spend money? But really, this time of year as an LGS, it's, all right, I've got foot traffic, kind of, it may not be actual foot traffic, but I've got traffic I'm not going to see otherwise. I've got grandmas, family members, friends, whatever, that just know some kid plays Magic. Do I really want that, or do I want these board games that everyone's talking about? And that's why it's really important for the LGS at this point. And that this set release is kind of crucial in the sense that, it can make or break an LGS in some ways. I mean, not like bankrupt them, but it can certainly go a long way towards making their holiday good or bad.
Yeah, they might have to operate a little leaner coming out of the holidays if things don't move well enough. Yeah. And I'm curious to know, and this might be something I track with the people that I know that work in various LGSs up here, is what their allocation for first wave look like compared to their allocation for second wave of each one of these sets, because I think that's, along with larger vendors, I think we might also see the same thing at the LGS level, which is operate a little more lean into the holidays, because you've got to start getting these orders in for everything around the same time. You can't just last minute this stuff unless for whatever reason you sell out, right? And we might see more of a push for allocation waves 2 or 3 if these sets actually like do well and they perform well at the LGS and the vendor level.
So I do know for a fact that one of the LGSs here was given the same allocation for werewolves as they were for AFR, but they took less.
Okay.
Because they did have the bigger orders that they had to place for the holidays that they were trying to get in.
Yep.
Because some stores have already started ordering their holiday stuff,
yep.
knowing Christmas comes earlier and earlier every year, so you may as well start stocking it in like October.
Yeah.
I think Crimson Vow is going to be the one that's really telling of how many people pick up their full allocation, how many people go short, and additionally, the interesting thing to me is going to be what happens with collector's boosters for these sets. Which is not something we really touched on in the first half, was, collector's boosters do have a little bit more of that, like, high-end gift mystique
yep.
for, like, stocking stuffers. So would you almost go not heavier on them necessarily, but would you try to push them harder to your walk-in customers than you necessarily would your normal set boosters?
Yeah. I think this might be a case where I'd probably allocate about the same for collector's boosters, with AFR outstanding as I mentioned earlier, the exception to a lot of things and not the rule, because we know AFR did pretty poorly overall all around.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the fact that it was a short allocation, if I remember correctly. The set just didn't do for Magic what players expected it to do, but it seemed to capture the hearts and minds of even surface level D&D players, and might have made the conversion from D&D to Magic that WotC was hoping for. So I think that's actually a really good point. Receiving one CBB compared to a handful of packs for a lot of people as a stocking stuffer might be a great idea, but I don't think I'd short stock CBBs comparatively to other sets.
No. I just think it becomes a push harder thing, because that is, and I don't know why I didn't think about it, but yeah, that's something you would try to push. In addition to the commander decks, is here's these really cool things that they get a lot of bright, shiny things that are worth more money.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, whoever walks in here is they're worth more money and is like, oh, okay, I'll get this for them.
Yeah, you can holiday bundle and stuff like that too. It makes it really palatable to put together a commander deck and some amount of packs for the new player or what have you. You build your own product, essentially, your own SKU at the LGS level, and even at the large vendor level, you can build your own SKU, and it generally speaking works out well. As a large vendor, though, to go back to episode 1, I think the reason I didn't think about it at all was because, to me, it's no skin off my back. I'm just going to order CBBs, and they'll sell one way or the other. I just put them in the warehouse and on the website, set it, forget it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I know Innistrad's going to sell well. It's split vampires and it's split werewolves. So even from an emotional standpoint, as a large vendor, it's like it just doesn't hit at all. It just doesn't resonate positively or negatively, which might be a bad thing, all things said and told, or because it's such a solid sale and such a guaranteed sale, I just check the box. Yes.
Fine.
Yeah. How many do you want? Yes. Like, whatever. As a large vendor. At the LGS level, I think that's definitely something I have to care about. And I'm going to spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to figure out how to do this properly. And then when it's all said and done and I've got everything in for allocation 1 and I'm looking towards the rest of my holiday sales, I'm going to begin to fret that this happens again, maybe next year. And I'm going to have to be really litigious about all of my documentation and all of my sales for this year, so that next year when this happens,
I know what to do.
Exactly.
So what do you think reality for backpacker for you? Where do you go there?
As a backpacker, when I heard this, that they were doing 2 split sets, I actually celebrated, because I felt like this was finally them recognizing that they needed to do an EDH only product like this. And I don't mean the decks. I mean, you pull all the EDH bullshit out of your standard sets, and hopefully soon your supplementals, and you just put it in its own you put it in its own sidecar, and you just slap it on to the main set. And then it changed, and I kind of felt the same way, because I'm not busting boxes as a backpacker. I just have to pay more attention to spoilers and start looking at, like, okay, what's coming down the pipeline? There's a lot of graveyard synergies that were just released over the weekend. What am I looking at? Do these keywords matter? Does Dread Return become a better card thanks to some of what we're seeing? And now I've got to start, like, hunting and pecking through Gatherer or Scryfall to see, okay, what gets better, what gets worse. And I think as far as the sets and EDH decks are concerned, I'm actually not looking into the standard sets for anything in particular outside of Ren and 7. I'm looking backwards in time because we're doing so much with the graveyard and we're doing so much with themes that already exist that I think buying into older synergistic cards, not reserve lists, just things that are already out of print and a couple of years out of purview, that's where I'm going to make my money as a backpacker. I don't need to buy the standard cards. They're going to come out. People are going to buy them anyway. I want to get in on the things that make them better, or as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of things in the graveyard. Anything that benefits from the kind of recursion and sacrifice themes that we're seeing in Midnight Hunt, for instance. That's where I'm looking. And so I'm kind of happy that I get to relax and just read through the spoilers and see okay, we're really focusing on the graveyard here. What am I doing? And it gives me both focus and purpose, I want to say.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I'm at too, is that now it's finally I don't have to pay as much attention to the standard or constructed stuff because we are harkening back to these abusable synergies. And, my last pick, here's a card that's one card away from being busted in half.
Yep.
This is when I would go back and look at, your hollow ones and stuff where it's all right, so with all these graveyard synergies, what suddenly gets better?
Yeah.
What was a card away now that might have the card? Is there something I want to go deeper on? I'll still do the same thing I always do, where I get 2 boxes of the EDH decks and just sit on them.
Mm-hmm.
And, if they go up, they go up. If they don't, I just sell them for wholesale and call it a wash.
Yeah.
And other than that, it's nice to take a break and not have to okay, well, I need to be, Friday of release. I need to be there on TCG Player, waiting for the bottom to hit and to just buy, so that I have the stuff I need for standard because, standard's only around for a couple months.
Yep.
And, who knows if standard 22 is whatever new standard, what it's going to look like. Do I need to buy some of the older stuff? So I'm in the same window as you, looking in the last 2-3 years. What's some stuff that was printed that was synergistic or was a card away that in Modern or Pioneer might make a showing now that we're back at Innistrad and we have these graveyard synergies that we didn't necessarily have before.
Yeah, absolutely. The Galaxy Brain moment that I had this morning, somebody linked Lisa, Forgotten Archangel, and I'll bring this up real quick.
Yeah, that card's great.
You have 2 white and a black for a 4/5 flying lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. That plays really well with a lot of the graveyard synergies that we're seeing from Golgari as a whole. And people linked this in Discord, and they were talking about what could be done with it. Is there anything that you would look at? And my first thought was, I would look at reanimation spells and reanimation targets. And I was like, wait a minute, no, I would just look at, as I mentioned earlier, straight Dread Return. It's a reanimation spell that kills your own creatures, so you get 2 bites at the apple. It's that kind of thing, because I get to relax. I just get to galaxy brain a lot of what's going on and see okay, this is pretty cool,
Yeah.
Croaking Counterpart, another outstanding card that we got to look at and just enjoy. Cackling Counterpart does some stuff in EDH, so this fits right in. You have a lot of other Simic clones that it fits with, so it's just kind of whatever. It'll fit in somewhere, but I get to be a lot more discerning and a lot more relaxed, which I like. It means overall, not having to care about the standard meta and not having to support players for that, or even really support players for Modern, because the opportunity to play Modern FNMs at a lot of stores is going to be pretty low with these set releases back to back. It gives me time to actually start combing back through Modern results and really calling an inventory for that once we come out of the holidays. And similarly with standard and EDH, everything kind of goes into a lull, and I get to Scrooge McDuck for a hot minute and then start spending my cash.
It's pretty great. This is definitely, we're about to be in the time where as a backpacker it's almost it's feast mode.
Yeah.
Because you do, everything's lower because people are selling to get money for the holidays, and you do have that opportunity to kind of swoop in and pick stuff up. Which, maybe the wallet fatigue is good in that regard, because people like you and I benefit from it because, I don't want to buy these cards. Let me sell some stuff. All right, cool, fine. Here's $100. Go get a nice present for someone.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
That's going to be nice too, being able to scoop stuff up during the holidays through both sets, provided Crimson Vow is as decent as we hope it will be.
Yeah.
If I was a backpacker and I was solely supporting Standard, I'd probably be pretty miffed at this overall.
Yeah, I'd be so mad.
Because my ability to buy in, like you mentioned, at the low, if you want to do it on TCG Player, you've got to be right there. Or even if you're the kind of person who wants to wait until like the second true low, the actual dip, then you've got to wait until basically Crimson Vow releases. And now everybody might be scrambling for that because of what we're seeing from Crimson Vow. So it's not like people are going to be flooding the market as often as they would. In that regard, it's really dicey, and I dislike it as a backpacker, but that's never been my MO as a backpacker. So I think I'm actually pretty okay with this. And if this becomes a cyclical thing, if this is something WotC wants to do once a year, I think I'm okay with it because it gives me that time to really like relax and take better inventory of what I'm doing and where I want to focus. It just gives me like respite, especially when we don't have any large events to worry about.
Yeah, which is good for now.
Yeah. I think if I was the kind of local backpacker that was also buying to resell, so I'm just like buying locally and then flipping TCG Player as my outlet, I think I'd actually be pretty okay with this as well because you're going to have a lot of those people that are going to buy in and then want to re-up.
Yep.
Which means they're going to need to sell somewhere, and as long as my numbers are decent, flipping.
They're selling to me.
Yep, exactly. And flipping into TCG Player isn't that bad, and it's a lot more work because it's a protracted amount of time between sets, but if I'm a backpacker, this is essentially a secondary job, and I should be ready for that and not, be upset that I'm making more money than I normally would. So it's like, I don't know. If I was a lazy backpacker, I'd probably be upset, but
It's hard to be a lazy backpacker.
You can't.
It's hard to be a good backpacker and be lazy. That's the distinction I should make.
I think you're on. I think that's the one we're spot on, yeah.
Yeah. Picks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the last thing to talk about of this one is just, I guess, a player.
As a player, whatever. I play Modern now. Maybe I'll get some cards. I think as a Standard player, it pushes me more towards Arena because I would much rather just play there, even though the wild card system is still awful.
Yep.
And not having a secondary market on there is not great. This kind of release structure definitely makes it seem like they're trying to incentivize Arena as a Standard player.
I think so too. I think it would be extremely difficult for me as a player to want to re-up this quickly. And if I was the kind of person that liked cracking packs, I think I would feel terrible about this heading into the holiday season.
Yeah.
I think I would honestly
missing out.
Yeah, I would have to skip one of these sets, I believe. Yeah. I don't think a lot of players are naturally as enfranchised as WotC thinks and can buy a box of each of these heading into a holiday season.
Yeah.
And I think that would annoy me as somebody who would want to either keep a box, buy a box and keep it, or buy a box and crack it, or buy two boxes, one to keep and one to crack.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way I would enjoy this as a Standard player.
No, not at all.
But outside of that, I'm ready for picks.
All right, I'm going first.
Yep.
Speaking of, we touched on earlier cards with synergies from the last couple of years that may be a card or so away from being busted, similar to my last pick, Hollow One. I am going for Pack Foil Shadow of the Grave. What does this card do? Well, it's from Amonkhet, so that's probably why you don't remember what it does. Let me get into the history of cards like this. So, for those of you that play Legacy, you know that Iggy Pop was a deck for a long time, which involved discarding your hand to LED, getting some of it back, etc., looping like that.
Hold on, I didn't realize you were going to bring up Iggy Pop. I gotta bring up Ill-Gotten Gains so people can read this card.
Oh yeah, it's a doozy. So Ill-Gotten Gains, for those of you that didn't play during EMA or during Urza Block, exile it. Each player discards their hand, then returns up to 3 cards from their graveyard to their hand. So what you would do is you would cast Ill-Gotten Gains, and then you would LED.
Yep.
Great. Discard it. Everything's gone. Put it all back. We have mana and a storm count. We're in business. So cards like Shadow of the Grave. 2 mana, instant, which is actually kind of important. Return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that you cycled or discarded this turn. So obviously this isn't going to be great with something like LED or Iggy Pop, because whatever, you just discarded it all and you're getting it back to net 1 mana in a storm. It seems like you're losing that game. At any rate, the reason that this card sticks out to me is because, one, the pack foils are less than $3 right now on TCG Player, which is huge. And two, cycling. So cycling is something that we touch on periodically in commander sets, core sets, supplementals, whatever, that we get through Magic. And it seems like every time there's something like a stabilizer that interacts in a neat way with cycling, reducing the cost, making it easier, giving all your cards cycling, what have you. So we have Brothers War coming out next year. And the interesting thing is that cycling started in Urza block. So my expectation is that worst case scenario, this card is just worth $3 forever in the pack foil, and you're not really out all that much.
No.
But if we get something that abuses cycling in the Brothers War set, which I believe, let me check the date on that. I think it's Q3?
Q4 2022.
Q4 2020. So we're about a year out. So we're a little early, admittedly. But we also have Double Masters in there, which is another opportunity for them to hit cycling.
Yep.
We also have Dominaria, which was another set that had cycling in it. So we're looking at probably sometime Q3, Q4 next year. If nothing else, this card gets more looks. Mm-hmm. And more looks is all we need for it to go from a $3 to a $6 to a $10 foil. So I'd be comfortable personally sitting on probably about 20 copies of this at $3. $60? Sure, that's a good meal. I can put that in a card that I put in a box and forget about it and not feel bad about it. As far as timeline, you're looking at like Q3, Q4 next year that we would reasonably see a return on this. Now, the other interesting thing going for this card is that, like I said, it's from Amonkhet, and it's not worth a lot of money from Amonkhet.
Nope. Which,
granted, most of the set is not worth a lot of money. But this card, unlike some of the cards like Hazaret, never saw play in Standard. This card was just like, that cycling deck was around for a weekend, and that was it. So I think that this, is probably a forgotten about card. When we get some looks, you may see a sudden explosion in inventory, but you'll also see an explosion in liquidity, which is important. As far as how I'm outing it, it's going to be Card Kingdom buy list.
Yep.
It's the fastest way to do it. You may have to be real quick on the uptake because it may get filled by one or two people sitting on a bunch of copies. But I think Q3, Q4, this card's set to be worth more than just a bulk foil rare at $3, because it is just a card away from being busted in half. If we get something that makes cycling free, if we get something like Ill-Gotten Gains that's more efficient, anything like that happens, all of a sudden this card is a banger.
Yeah. Where I think we're missing right now is a clear general for this card. So to point out in Onslaught block, the cycling payoffs, if you want to call them that, the two enchantments were Astral Slide, white, and Lightning Rift, red. In Amonkhet, it's Drakehaven, blue, and not Faith's Reward. Faith something or other. Black enchantment that's Drain and Gain. And Gain. It's basically Lightning Rift, but for black.
Yeah.
Right. Aside from Gavi Nest Warden, there's really no clear cycling general, and right now this card fits into, and I'll bring this up on Rec. Angie Falconwrath, discard a card, draw a card. Whenever you discard a card, if it has Madness, untap it, right? So in theory, you could just chain through your deck and then Shadow the Grave it all back, combo out. Kydal, Chosen of Crewfix, is basically just going to key off of the number of cards you draw. The number one partner with us, Ravos, doesn't do much. Verena, Lich Queen, whenever you attack with one or more zombies, draw that many cards, then discard that many cards, right? So again, you're just dumping your hand, redrawing, and then getting everything back with Shadow of the Grave. Chromium the Mutable, discard a card until end of turn, becomes a human, right? So it just allows you to cycle back. And then Zur, which is kind of the Swiss Army knife of cycling decks, because Zur gets Lightning Rift, Zur gets Drakehaven, and Zur gets the Black Enchantment. Ask me how I know. And until we have a clear cycling general, I think Shadow of the Grave kind of sits behind the scenes and just plays well with the first four themes that we saw, which is just draw a bunch of cards, discard a bunch of cards, and then gain value by bringing them all back, right? I think that's where we are until we get a clear cycling general.
For sure.
And once we get that, I think like that's where this goes. That's where it takes off. Or or for whatever reason, more people just want to play Nekasar at a table.
Yeah.
And you just wheel away everything that you've ever drawn in your life and get it all back with Shadow of the Grave. Like, that's an option too. But
it is.
That takes a dedicated kind of person. Personally, I thought Shadow of the Grave would have picked up in Modern. I thought we would have seen something there with Modern Horizons and the fact that we got Astral Drift and the cycling lands from Onslaught, but the format's just too fast for it right now, sadly.
I know.
So we're kind of pooped on that. Otherwise, I like the card overall. It has easy application into EDH, and in a number of formats, it's got to be no more than one card away from actually being, like, relevant is kind of the wrong word, but also the right word here.
Yeah.
My card, on the other hand, is Gilded Lotus, and effectively what I would like to call an EDH staple. So,
yes.
This card's been around since Mirrodin, so it's effectively been around forever, and I was specifically tracking the 2013 version this entire time, and it's kind of interesting what happened over the past couple of days. So, when I added this to my list, it was back in February of 2021. CK was buying 32 at $3. The TCG market was 348, and there were 108 on the marketplace. When I picked this card 2 weeks ago, CK was buying 67 at $3.95, and since then, filled. They're no longer buying any from M13. They are buying copies from Mirrodin, Dominaria only right now. Oh, Mirrodin as well. But they're buying 5 from Mirrodin, and they are buying 55 from Dominaria. So basically, what I've been seeing this entire time is anytime the core set ones come up, or Mirrodin really in bulk, people just push. They just push into the CK buy list. TCG Player, on the other hand, has 125 at $4.95 for LP or better, which basically means that people are still buying these. The floor is rising on them. And the reason I like this card is because it's highly playable across a few strategies in EDH, namely anything to do with artifacts or a high mana value, non-green based commander. And it's extremely good in those monocolor decks because these generals generally have high pip requirements. And if we take a look on Rec, we'll see Teferi, we'll see Muzia, we'll see Kozilek. A lot of mono blue here, obviously, because it doesn't have a lot of ramp, and then you drop down to like Avacyn and Kumano, who are also very mana-hungry generals. So, as far as the format is concerned, this is either a combo piece or an accelerant, and this allows players to ramp quickly from the early game straight into effectively the late game. If you're going to play a monocolored deck with a high mana value general, this is a must, and I put that word in quotes, a card you have to look at, you must look at. And if you're looking to artifact combo out, the ability to recycle or twiddle this allows you to push your mana requirement and open up a number of possible kill avenues, because you're going to be generating mana with any sacrifice outlet, be it like something from Junk Diver all the way to effectively just an on-tap effect. So in short, this is foundational to a number of strategies and should remain in the conversation when building any artifact-based deck or monocolored high mana value deck. So my timeline for this is a little bit interesting because I'm basically just going off the market and less the CK value because of what we've seen. So it's finally recovering after a huge tumble from the Dominaria reprint, which did really truck this. And the subsequent plateau, demand is finally driving the price again. And we might see another reprint in the recently announced Dominaria United, and if so, that stagnates the pick, but without a reprint to my expectation, this is the price trend that will continue over the next 12 months. It's just going to go up. I think it's a fairly safe bet, and we'll be able to exit the buy list fairly easily afterwards. I believe what we saw at CK recently was just the Secret Lair flow in, those foils, and then, like I said, the push. And so when I picked this 2 weeks ago, there was actually immediate arbitrage opportunity, but I don't expect that to last for too long. That was a footnote I added when I picked this card 2 weeks ago, and here we are now, and somebody pushed 60-something to CK, right?
Arbitrage happened.
Yep. And here we are. So this is a card that I expect to just keep churning upwards in price. I like the slope prior to the reprint, and I'll bring it up again just so we can see. And then you'll notice right at Dominaria, there's a hard tumble. It's just a straight upward trajectory for years on this card from about Theros, which is really when EDH started to kind of take off from Rav into Theros, up. Dominaria reprint, incoming, bloop, tumble, stagnate, and finally picking back up. And as more people build with this, as they realize how good it is, how foundational it is to format, that's where I expect the market value to continue to rise, as we have been seeing it recently.
I think one of the interesting things about this card is, one, it obviously has that casual EDH appeal. There's a ton of people that just throw it in decks, even 2-color decks. It's fine in there.
Yep.
The other is how many different, arts and versions there are.
Yes.
So when you were talking about it, I was looking at the FTV version, which I think is great. And then I completely forgot there's a Secret Lair version of this card.
Yep, as did I.
It also exists in foil, and the art is incredible. But it's interesting that when you look at specifically the From the Vault, the price drop was about 66%, and it's recovered twice since then, and it's almost back to where it was prior to the Dominaria printing. So it shows that some versions of this card do have a little bit more price memory than others. Yep. So I think that that was just something interesting I noticed while you were going through your reasoning. I do think, though, that like you said, if we don't get a reprint, especially if we don't get a reprint the size of Dominaria.
Yep.
Because that set was printed. If we don't get a reprint that size, this price is going to continue to recover because it is such a casual EDH rock star.
Yes.
Everybody loves it in casual EDH. Yep. If you want a mana rock, Soul Ring and probably Gilded Lotus #2, if not Mana Vault or something, if you want to spring.
If you can afford, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's this card, worst case, it just looks good to even out a trade in a trade binder at about $5. It's something I don't mind picking up at the $2 to $3 range, and people are happy to sell it at that if they come to me at a booth.
Yep.
So I think long term, solid pick for sure.
I do want to key in on what you mentioned about the FTP 20 version. So this, like I said, this has been sitting on my list since February, and every couple of weeks I'd go and take a look at it, and I'd be really disappointed that I was tracking 2013 in particular, because at the time it looked like the best option because it was the flattest and started to see recovery. But what I could have done earlier and is also a very good look is the Mirrodin version. That version has begun to recover a little bit better than the FTP 2013. CK is still buying it, albeit lesser copies overall. It's still on the list. And that's just the same art as the 2013 and the Dominaria one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think. No, Dominaria uses the Gold Lotus. And the
heads. Right. Yeah.
Different art completely. But I wasn't tracking the overall quantity of the Mirrodin version. I didn't think I'd have to, because that was the first one as a shortest print run, because it was prior to all the New World Era stuff and the Return to Wrath print numbers. I didn't think it was necessary because it would just price itself out faster. And I went with 2013, which seemed much more approachable. The Dominaria one just being like low-hanging fruit, and I didn't think that one would recover nearly as well in time. So to speak to your point, it's not the FTV one. Yes, absolutely has a better price floor. It definitely did recover. We saw the secondary spike when I brought it up on stocks. It's recovering a little bit better than everything else. The Mirrodin one is also another really good look. I just don't have any solid numbers on that.
Fair.
But that's it for my pick this week. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we head out?
Nope, we're good to go.
All right. So thank you for sitting through our reactions. I guess the reactions to the Innistrad double feature. We are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, on Patreon, on Facebook, and that is our YouTube channel. If you want to listen to the audio podcast, it is on Stitcher, Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast. The video, as I mentioned, is on YouTube. And I am at Halt I Am Reptar on Twitter. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.